everyone, and welcome to the University of Nottingham PGCEi webinar. My name is Helen Spiropoulos and I'm the Admissions Manager at Stafford Associates. And joining me this evening all the way from the university is Dr. Rupert. Good evening to you, Dr. Rupert.
Hi Helen, and hi to all of you. Nice to have you here tonight, so hope to be able to answer some questions for you.
Good, and how we're going to conduct the webinar this evening is I'm just briefly going to introduce you to Stafford. I'm then going to hand you over to Dr. Rupert, who's going to talk about the program. And right at the end of the webinar, you will have the chance to type out any questions that you want to ask me or Dr. Rupert. However, please note that I am going to group those questions together simply because a lot of the questions are similar, if not identical. Okay, so I shall be grouping them all together. All right, let's get started. Who is Stafford Associates? Well, Stafford Associates was established in 1993, and we are a resource centre for 5 UK universities, one of which is the University of Nottingham. Now, Stafford offers a variety of programs ranging from certificates to diplomas, bachelor's, MBAs, MECs, right through until doctorates. So we really have programs for all your personal and professional needs. Now, the mere fact that you are here this evening means that you have been in touch with one of our experienced academic consultants, and our function is to assist you throughout your application process. And we do also offer academic as well as administrative support. Okay, I'm now going to hand you over to Dr. Rupert, and I'll be joining you again towards the end of the webinar. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Helen. Okay, so hello again to everybody. Good to have you here. I'm going to tell you about the University of Nottingham and the School of Education here a little bit. And then, of course, talk about the PGCEi course more specifically. So talk about the aims of the course, what it's trying to do, what it is, what it isn't, the structure of the course, and what you can expect in terms of assessment and things like that. And we'll talk about how you can apply for the course and any advice about that. And I'm hoping that that's going to answer a lot of the questions you might have. But as Helen said, as we go through, of course, you can type in your questions, and if there's anything specific you want to know, then we'll be really happy to answer those afterwards. So starting off by thinking about the university itself, the University of Nottingham is a very highly ranked university internationally. It's in the what we call in the UK the Russell Group of elite universities, and is, as you can see here, in top 1% of universities internationally in the world rankings. It talks about this being a global university, not just because we have a lot of international students, but we also have campuses around the world. So we have a University of Nottingham campus in Malaysia and in China as well. And a lot of the research that we do is global. Looking more specifically at the School of Education, this is a really long-standing School of Education, over 100 years old, a great history here. And in terms of its status, in terms of the subject itself, we're ranked in the UK 4th for the subject of education and 3rd in terms of the research side of what we do here. So you can see that the department itself is one of the best in the UK and has that kind of reputation that goes with it. And that doesn't only mean that it's got a reputation that is good for your qualification and is something that employers might recognise, but it also means that the materials that you work with and the people that you encounter are connected to things that are quite groundbreaking and the latest research and the latest thinking in education. So it's a really, really high quality school of education that this course is part of. So talking a bit more now about the PGCEi course itself. So PGCEi is Postgraduate Certificate in Education International. So this is a course with about a 10-year history, and it's grown very, very quickly over the last decade. We've had something like 5,000 students registered on this course over the years, all around the world. and at any one time there's something like 900 or so students that are taking this course. So it's a course that runs in continents all over the globe. So we've got cohorts that are active in South America, various countries in Africa and Asia and Europe. And we're talking to you today as part of that big global family. So we're talking about the cohort in the Middle East, in the UAE specifically, which is one of our hubs, and one of our biggest hubs, in fact, one of our most successful and longest standing cohorts. So the course, to be clear about what it is it's an academic program of study. So it's a master's level course. It involves the study of educational theory and that kind of underpinning to what educators do, whether they be classroom teachers in school or working in other educational settings. It's not a course that has a practical teaching element to it. So one thing that's really important to understand is it's not a course that leads to a qualification like qualified teacher status or a license to teach or anything that involves an assessment of you in school. So there is no assessment of students in a school or other educational setting. It's purely a course about educational theory. So that's really important to keep in mind. The course it involves a blended learning approach. So what we mean by that is we have 2 face-to-face meetings with UK tutors. So we come over, so I'll be coming over again in a couple of weeks' time to the UAE and doing face-to-face teaching with our current cohort that we have there. So we do that twice a year. So in the course of a year, you have 2 compulsory face-to-face workshops where you meet your tutors face-to-face. I have a group myself and colleagues. We usually have 4 or 5 tutors that come out. So we're there as a team, but we also have a smaller subgroup that we get to know really, really closely. And those are the people then that we follow through the course. So for my group, for example, I work with them face-to-face and do the teaching when we come out for those 2 different workshops, but also I mark all of their academic work. So the blend is that face-to-face element and then learning online at a distance and working through modules. So that's how the course fits together and that's how the course works, which means there's a lot of flexibility around it. As the third point says here, it's a course that is focusing on you reflecting on your practice through theory. So although, as I said, it doesn't assess your practice, we're not training you in strategies for the classroom in that sense. We are looking at things that will help your practice because we'll encourage you to take a broader view of education and to understand education more widely. So working at this kind of master's level is really, really valuable for exposing you to all sorts of new ideas. So, for example, I always say to people, my background before working in this sort of role was as a teacher in school. And when I was teaching in school, I did a part-time program of study on top of the job. I did my MA in education, and it really, really changed my practice. It opened my eyes to all sorts of new ideas. It allowed me to step back from what I do every day and step back from the culture of whatever school that we're in, because we can all be guilty of just narrowing down and doing things one way, or perhaps assuming that that's the only way. So for me, I know that it really launched my career and gave me a real step change in what I did. So that's the kind of thing, that's the kind of impact that we hope you're going to have, an impact on your practice through broadening your thinking, but not an assessment of your practice directly. So the structure of the course then, there are 4 compulsory modules. So you don't choose different modules to study, but all of these modules are applicable for all age phases that you might teach. So in my current group and in the cohort I'm going to go and see again in a couple of weeks' time, I've got people who are teaching early years, teaching kindergarten age, all the way through to teaching the oldest secondary pupils. In the past, I've had people who've been teaching adult learners. So a whole range, and the course, the modules are generic enough that you can apply all of that to any age range and any setting that you're working in. Having said that they're compulsory though, you can tailor each of the modules to your own particular context. So if you're working in a particular age group or you teach a particular subject, you can choose parts of the module that are most relevant to you. And all of your assignments that you write will have a connection to your practice so that you can be relating them to what you do every day. So that's the way you can personalize what you do. So this journey through these 4 modules has a logical sequence to it. So the first module we do is called Contexts, and this is about the purposes of education. So we look at this in a specifically international education context. So this is one of the ways that the course is especially designed for international educators. We look at the purposes of education, the different aims of education. So for example, should education be really all about getting the highest grades for students? Some would say that. Should education be about developing a whole person so that they are equipped for life in a broader sense, not just academic? Should education be about trying to change the world, make the world a better place? And so on. There are lots of different views on what education should be trying to do. So we explore all of these different ideas, and we do that in an international education context. The second module, once we've determined in module 1 what education might be for, and you've got your views on that, we look at how students learn. So we look at lots of different theories of learning. Some of them are going to be things that seem very familiar to you. You maybe haven't heard of the particular theorists or some of the terminology, but you might recognize some of the ideas and practices. Others will be quite different and very different from what you do every day, perhaps, and maybe quite challenging, and maybe things that you don't agree with. But we're going to look at a whole range of different approaches. Module 3 then, now we've thought about how learning takes place, the logical next step is to think about how we therefore teach. So logically, module 3 is about thinking about different approaches that teachers might take. So we look at things that you would incorporate in your daily practice, like assessment, management of behavior, special educational needs, and various aspects of a teacher's role like this. And then finally, module 4, that is labeled here as the final project, is really asking the question, if you've taught something to learners, how do you know that your students have understood it? So module 4 is all about understanding as a concept, and you explore understanding through carrying out a miniature inquiry project of your own. So you will choose something that's of interest to you and of relevance to your practice and gather some data and produce a small scale piece of original research. So all of those modules are assessed in the same way by equally weighted assignments. So there are no exams. They are all assessed by 3,000 word written assignments. Some of them are what we might think of as being quite close to an essay type of format. Others are more in the line of reports, but they're all 3,000 word written assignments. Now, often it's quite daunting for people to think about working at master's level, if that's a new level for them, or perhaps returning to study after not having studied for some years in some cases, or maybe coming to a discipline with essay writing in the social science tradition that we have in this subject, when perhaps you've studied something different. If you've studied engineering or mathematics or something that has a different tradition of knowledge and how that's assessed. So all sorts of people understandably have anxieties about the assessed process and whether they're up to the job and whether they can do that. So to reassure you, that's quite normal to feel like that. And we take great care in our first workshop in particular, which is right at the start of the course, to try and give you lots of input on that and lots of support. So all of these assignments are preceded by a piece of coursework that you do, where you can get some feedback to test your understanding of the main ideas of the module. So you've had your tutor giving you some comments on that. You also get a chance to put a proposal together for your assignment. So you can lay out the ideas and the structure and the way you're going to do things. And again, your tutor can advise you about whether you're on the right track. And for the first module, just the first module only, we have an extra stage where you can submit a full draft of the assignment that isn't formally assessed, but we give you lots of detailed feedback on that so that you can work on that before you submit your final version. So in lots of different ways, we're giving you a lot of support for that style of writing. And of course, showing you some examples of some past work, analysing that and looking at what kind of things we're after and what the criteria are. So most people who come onto the course are probably initially thinking of just the PGCEi as a standalone qualification, which is great, and that's what it is. Of course, it's a certificate in its own right, but it can also be seen as the first step in a longer learning journey if you choose. So as long as you pass all your assignments at master's level, you can use credits from this course towards our MA in education programs. And we have various different versions of the MA. If you chose to come onto our MA in education, the general route, you could use 60 credits from your PGCEi, which is a third of the course done already. So a third of the course for the MA is covered and of course paid for in the course of doing the PGCEi qualification. And you could come onto that within 10 years of finishing the course. So some people like to do that immediately. Some people like to take a few years, have a break from study, come back to it. Others, it's not for them, but that's a really advantageous thing to have as something that you can work towards if you choose. All of the materials that you need for the course are provided by us, so they are all part of the course and they're all provided through our VLE, so through your online portal. So each of the modules that I've mentioned has a series of different units, and within each unit there are activities to work through, and there are lots and lots of readings embedded in those units for you. There's also audio material, there's video material, so it's a really multimedia experience. Also, each module has further reading at the end of the module with links to electronic books that you can access from the university. So you don't need to be going and buying books. You don't need to have access to an actual library because you have electronic access to our library. And then also you can use the library here in a broader way. You can use the search function to search for electronic journals and other sources to really take your reading and your study to an additional level. So all of the materials you need are accessible electronically, and that's free to you as part of the course. What you also have, the third point here, of course, we've touched on, is support from the tutor. So you'd have your named tutor, somebody like me, for example, with my group. You'll have met that person right near the start of the course. So you'll have had that chance at the face-to-face workshop to get to know this person. No, so it's not just a name or somebody from a distance. That tutor is then available. You can email them, you can arrange to have conversations by Skype or telephone or some other medium if you want tutorial support. And that person follows you through the course and is that named contact for you. And of course, when we come back for the second of the two face-to-face workshops, it's really nice to pick up that contact again. So when I come out in a couple of weeks' time, this is going to be the second workshop for the group I'm working with. And I'm already really looking forward to seeing those students again and getting reacquainted with them after they've done their first couple of modules. It's also something that people don't think about perhaps necessarily. It's also an opportunity to learn from each other. So I talked before about how easy it is to get just stuck into one way of thinking and one school system and way of working. What this course also gives you is access to your peers on the course. So in your group that you have on the course that you meet at the face-to-face workshops, there'll be people from all sorts of different schools working in different regions, in different countries around the Middle East area. And you'll get to hear about the way that they work. You'll get to hear about the systems and the curricula that they work with. And that gives you a really rich network of people to learn from. So as well as the chance to do that at the face-to-face workshop, there are forums online which are part of our study materials. And we ask you at various times to post ideas and responses to tasks to these online forums. And that means that other people, not only other people in the group and the cohorts, can interact with you and you can share ideas and broaden your perspective that way. But in some cases, we have what's called the global forum. So actually, there are people from all those cohorts around the world that I mentioned, people who may be studying in Vietnam or China or Nigeria, all around the world, who are following the same course and are also putting their perspectives in. So there's a really rich opportunity to study from your peers as well as from the University of Nottingham staff. So in terms of entry requirements onto the course, it's, as the title suggests, it's a postgraduate certificate. So we would normally be looking for people with their undergraduate, with their bachelor's degree, at least second class honours. So that's our standard entry requirement in terms of your academic prior study. If English isn't your first language, then there's also an IELTS requirement there, because of course the course is taught in English, and at master's level, that's important that you are equipped for studying in English and working and writing in English at that level. It's also important that you are somebody who has access to a classroom. So I mentioned already that we have all kinds of different educators. So lots of people are teachers, of course, in schools of all different age groups. We have a lot of teaching assistants or learning support assistants as well. We have some people who are not paid employees of a school, but perhaps are volunteering in a school or working in a school in some other capacity. What you do need, though, is you need to have access to a classroom, because 3 of the 4 modules are ones that are going to require you to draw on your experiences. So remember, I said that we're not assessing your actual practice in the classroom, but in the academic assignments you write, you will be referring to what you've done in the classroom, and you'll be linking some of the theory you've read about to some of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. So you need that source material, you need that access to examples that you can bring from practice and to things that you've done through your work with your students. So access to a classroom is definitely vital. And of course, probably goes without saying, as there's a lot of an online component to the course, you need to have access to the internet so that you can work on that. So what I've talked about there is the standard entry requirement. But we do look at non-standard applications. So if you have, for example, you don't have that undergraduate degree, but perhaps you've got some equivalent qualification, or you've got really, really extensive professional experience, and there's something where you feel you could make a strong case to us, then still talk to your Stafford consultants and consider making that application. And for every cohort, we do look at some people who don't fit that standard application profile, and we look at them on their own merits and see if there's a strong enough case that can be made. So to apply, your Stafford contact will guide you through all of this and point you in the right direction for things. But you can see here the kind of things that you're going to be asked to provide. One of the important things to single out perhaps is the third thing here, which is the personal statement. So this becomes especially important if your application is non-standard and we're trying to see if there's something equivalent you're offering. So make sure in your statement you're really giving us a convincing reason for wanting to study this course. What is it that you're hoping to get out of it? Talk about your educational experiences and your professional role in education and what you bring in that sense. But don't forget also to talk about your transferable skills. So all of you will have all sorts of experiences that are very valid from outside education that maybe are to do with communication skills or managing workload and those kinds of things. So make sure that you mention all of those things too. It also mentions a reference. So again, it's up to you who you choose to be a referee for you. But just make sure that they're very clear about the kinds of things I've talked about here, about what the course is all about. And they provide a reference that gives a real strong backup to what you're putting forward to us in terms of your experience and your work in education, but also your capability to work academically, to meet deadlines, those kind of things. So the referee, it's quite useful if they know as much as possible about the course, and then they can of course mention things that are appropriate when they talk about you. So we have 2 cohorts each year in this region, based in the UAE, and we have a cohort starting in March each year, and we have a cohort starting in October. So the cohort in March, which is just obviously a couple of weeks away now, is closed. So that cohort we're no longer recruiting for. So the next cohort we'll be thinking about is the October start. So that's a course or a group that's going to start on the 1st of October. And these places are limited, and we have a lot of demand, and we usually fill these cohorts. So it's really important that you get in touch with Stafford if you're interested, even though that seems like a long way away right now, and you may be thinking, you know, this is 8 months away. We have a closing date that's sometime before that. So it's really important to apply as soon as you can if you're interested in this. Just to give you a bit of an idea, the workshops, the face-to-face workshops for that cohort that starts in October, the course itself starts on the 1st of October. So that's when you have your access to all the materials and you can begin to look through things. And you can see here that within about 10, 11 days of starting, you've got your first workshop. So very, very quickly, almost right at the beginning of the course, you've got a chance to meet your tutor, to have 2 days of input, and that's the workshop at which we discuss the first 2 modules. The second workshop would be in March, probably early to mid-March, and that's where we would pick up on things and introduce modules 3 and 4. You can see here the fees here as well, and that's something that you work with Stafford on in terms of payment and so on, and the arrangements there. So we've covered quite a lot of things there, and I hope the information's been useful, but I'm guessing there may be questions or things you want a bit more clarification on. So with Helen's help, we'll see if there's anything coming through, and we'll do our best to answer.
Okay, so we have, thank you again, Dr. Rupert, that was actually very informative. But we have Lewis that has actually sent a very interesting and very common question that we do get. I have completed a degree from a Kuwaiti university. Is it necessary to still undertake the IELTS?
So the IELTS is going to depend on whether English is your first language, and also depends on the language of instruction through your training as well. So what we'd probably look at there is just look at that on an individual case basis, and the admissions department here has a list of particular universities around the world, if the instruction has been in English, and if they are on that recognised list, there may be scope there for exemption. But I think in your case, what we'd have to do is just look at your individual case and find out for you.
Yeah, I'm just going to also add there, Rupert, one of the things that you can consider, Lewis, is that if your university can send a letter stating that the medium of instruction was in English, that is something that the university will also consider with your application. Okay, so do take that into consideration. The next question we have is it possible to try and complete this program in less than 12 months? Is there a fast track option?
Yeah, so this is quite a common question. Yes, so you can complete faster than the designated period. So in practice, really, you'd normally be working for about 10 months through this course. So if you started in October, you would be finishing your work around about July. But you can go more quickly. What we'd normally say is we'd get you to do the first module and see how you get on with the workload, because it's very difficult to know until you begin. If you think after that you want to accelerate a bit, then you can liaise with your tutor and we can negotiate some different dates for you, and you can proceed at a faster pace. What I'd say is it's really unusual to do that. We don't get many people who do that because there's quite a lot of work to do. It's absolutely manageable, but you'll find, I think, that you probably need most of the time allocated for each module. So the answer is yes, you can do that, and we'll see how module 1 goes, and then we can negotiate with you individually if you still want to do that.
Okay, and we have Sneha from Kuwait. I am currently an online educator at the moment, but I have had experience working in the classroom in the past. Will I be eligible to do this program, even though you have mentioned that I need classroom access?
That might be a little tricky. You do need, for the modules that you work on, you do need to be able to reflect on lessons that have gone on in the classroom. So when we say lessons, they might be just with a few students. So if you're a learning support assistant or teaching assistant, for example, maybe you don't work with a whole class, you work with a smaller group or even 1 or 2 learners at a time. So that's all okay. But you do need to have some scope for talking about lessons and for trying out some things perhaps in lessons, and for gathering some data for the final module. So I think that would be quite tricky if you're only working as an online educator at the moment, and just thinking back to past practice alone would be quite difficult. But it might be worth you telling us more about your circumstances, and it might be worth you still liaising with Stafford and thinking about that, because when we look at your individual case, perhaps there are some details there that do give us a bit more reassurance. So I think the answer is that might be tricky. You're going to need some access to school, but perhaps follow that up with us and we can just see if there is some way we can see that things could work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do get in touch with your academic consultant at Stafford, or you're very welcome to contact me as well. And as Dr. Rupert has said, we can actually have a look at your application in an entirety and see if there's any way that we can assist you. Okay. Janet's question is, she has an IMN, which is Institute of Marketing Management in South Africa. I have a cash level 3 diploma from Dubai, and I do have 2 years teaching experience in a nursery setting, and also I'm a learning assistant experience at a British British educated college. However, I want to know that will I actually be able to qualify for the program, because I do not have a degree.
So this sounds like one of those non-standard applications that we look at. So you've got some other qualifications that are relevant, that are not perhaps at degree level necessarily, but they are relevant qualifications. You've got some professional experience. So that's something we'd have to consider on an individual basis. But from what you've mentioned there, I think it would be worthwhile pursuing that application with Stafford so that we could take a look at that. So I can't answer that conclusively here without looking at all the details, of course, but I think that would be something where it's worth putting in that application that we could look at on that non-standard basis.
Right, absolutely, Janet. Again, any qualifications that you've done, as well as a very strong personal statement, as Dr. Rupert has mentioned, do get in touch with your academic consultants so that we will be able to guide you as to what documentation you need to submit. Okay. Suzanne's question is, how many hours should I be studying a week, especially for researching, reading, and for my essays?
Yeah, so that's a good question, isn't it? Because I think most people embarking on this are working in schools in some way, because as we said, you need access to a classroom. And so the obvious thing is to wonder how you could fit this into probably what is a busy life already. So what we tend to say is that each of those 15 credit modules is roughly 150 hours of work, including all the reading and the writing and everything. And in terms of how that works in hours per week, we might be looking at something around 12 hours that you need to find somehow. So that would be a very rough guideline. Some people might be able to do it a bit less, some people might take a little more, but if we think of around about 12 hours. So if you think about how that might work, that can fit in around your lifestyle in different ways. You might want to do a little bit of study each evening if you're working, or perhaps you're working part-time and you can do some during the day, or maybe you need to just commit perhaps a whole day at the weekend and just do the whole lot in one go very intensively. So it doesn't really matter how you do that, but that's around about the hours that we'd be envisaging that you'll need to do.
Okay, and Shravani's question is, there are mandatory workshops in the UAE at the time that unfortunately I'm not here. How do I go about doing this then?
Okay, so the workshops are a compulsory part of the course, and actually it would be very difficult really to succeed on the course without coming to them, because there's a lot of input that you have there that's really, really important. So what we would say is that if you're looking at those dates and you're thinking, okay, the 11th and 12th of October, that's the time when I've got some other commitment already, we would encourage you to apply instead for the next cohort. So we wouldn't want you to be starting this cohort. It wouldn't be feasible for you to start this cohort if you know that you can't attend. So instead, we mentioned that there are 2 per year. So it's not a case of having to wait a whole year, but you could start it instead in March, and your workshops then, you'd have your first workshop in March, and then you'd have your second one in October. So that would be the advice. It would be just to wait for the next cohort.
Absolutely. Okay, and Abby's question is, if I do fail one of my assignments, do I get told where I have gone wrong, so that I can resubmit?
Yeah, again, very understandable question. And I mentioned before about lots of people feeling anxious about the academic side of things. So one thing we would pride ourselves on the course is giving a lot of feedback from tutors. So the tutors work really, really hard to give you a lot of guidance up front, but a lot of feedback on work you've done as well. So certainly, yes, every assignment, regardless of what your grade is, you get your feedback. It's very detailed, you know, normally a sort of a whole side A4 form that we fill in, with a lot of feedback about things. If you haven't been successful and you haven't met that master's threshold, then we give you really clear pointers on what you need to sort out, and you have an opportunity to resubmit your work. So you don't need to start all over again. You rework your piece in line with the guidance we've given. And also at that stage, as well as that written feedback, we would be strongly encouraging you to get in touch so that we can have a tutorial, either via Skype or some other medium if that's possible, or a telephone tutorial. You can ask emailed questions. So your tutor is there for you to try and clarify the written feedback further. So we want you to do well, and we want you to pass. So we certainly give really, really clear pointers about what you need to sort out here.
Okay, and Surushi's question is about the actual degree certificate, and I can see there's 2 or 3 questions that are very similar. Will my degree certificate state online distance learning?
No, it doesn't state that. So, and sometimes people do ask about this because they think perhaps it's important for employment reasons or whatever. So, no, it doesn't state that.
Okay, and my IELTS actually expired. However, I have taken my degree in English medium. Will I still need to redo a test again? Very similar to that whole IELTS question from the beginning.
Yeah, so it's really a similar answer, that we just need to find out a bit more about your circumstances, and perhaps where you've studied, and if that course is eligible to be counted as a recognised university and studying in English. If that's the case, then perhaps that's fine. If not, it might be a case of looking at IELTS again. But again, we just need to see your individual details for that.
Okay. And this is also a very popular question. I know there are other programs out there that ask for someone to assess me in a workplace. Is this program similar to that? Will there be someone that will come out from the university to assess me in the classroom?
So again, really good and popular question. So to be really clear, that this is not a course that involves any assessment of your teaching. So we don't come into your school or your educational setting, wherever that may be, to assess your teaching. And you don't have to have somebody in your school who is assessing you or mentoring you either. Some people like to, as an extra thing that they just do, they like to perhaps try and link up with a colleague in school and develop their own practice while they're working on the course. And that sounds like a nice thing to do, but that's absolutely not part of the course, and it's not part of the assessment. So to reiterate, this is a course that's master's level, academic study only, and although it has lots of connections to practice and draws on your practice, it's not involving any assessment of your practice.
Okay, and how many times can I actually resubmit an assignment in the event that I've actually failed it once or twice even? Can I resubmit it the third time? What would happen? Would I have to repay for that module?
Okay, so there isn't a single answer to this. Usually the situation is you have one chance to resubmit a piece of work. However, if your first go that wasn't successful is above a certain threshold, so if it just almost passed and was above a certain threshold, then there may be a chance for a second resubmission. That's something you can do once. So it's a slightly complicated answer because it depends what grade you get. So the standard thing would always be you have one chance to resubmit, but if your grade is high enough and is just only narrowly failed, there may be, depending on your other modules and grades, there may be a chance for a second resubmission.
Okay, and Janet, with regards to getting teaching positions in Dubai, that also does depend on the individual school that you are going to be sending the application to. Okay, so it does differ from emirate to emirate. It does differ from country to country in the Middle East. But do get in touch with your academic consultant at Stafford, and we will be able to give you some guidance on that as well. Okay. Yeah.
So in terms of using the PGCEi qualification as something to get some employment, that as Helen just said there, it does vary depending on where you are and even what school you're in. If you are in the UAE, for example, and there's teacher licensing being brought in, you need to look carefully at the requirements for that. What we seem to hear is that most people find that this course has complemented that licensing process really well, and the two go hand in hand really well. But you shouldn't be relying on this course alone as being some kind of qualification to teach or license to teach.
Absolutely. And can you explain the QTS? How do I go about getting QTS? And will I be able to teach in the UK once I have this qualification?
So QTS is a qualification. There's actually just an English qualification. So although you might hear about this around the world, it's actually one country's form of licensing or registration. And for those of you maybe that haven't heard of this, it stands for Qualified Teacher Status. So this is the formal qualification as a teacher that people have to have for the state sector in England. So this course doesn't include QTS because it doesn't have that assessment of your practical teaching. And also because QTS is a qualification for England, it's not something you can easily do elsewhere. So if you were to come back and you're thinking of either returning to England to teach or moving to England to teach, you would have to supplement the course in some other way. And usually the way people would do this is to take what's known as an assessment only QTS route. So you can have a look up, you can just Google assessment only QTS and you'll find sites about this. So the government here has lots of providers around the country that will offer this, and essentially what it means is you get a job in a school as an unqualified teacher. You have to have been teaching somewhere usually for 2 years beforehand, perhaps overseas for a couple of years beforehand. You get a job as an unqualified teacher in this country, and then you can be assessed on the job, not by doing further study, but just by building up evidence of what you do and being observed and so forth. So that's usually the route that you would do if you wanted to do QTS. I believe there are one or two routes through perhaps British schools in other countries around the world who are able to offer this as well. So it might be worth just looking at the British school system, but just to be clear that the QTS isn't built into this course.
Okay, good. And I think we have one last question from Suzanne. I understand the course doesn't assess teaching practice, but do trainees submit reflective feedback for lessons taught each week?
No, you don't submit regular feedback or any notes on your lessons you've done. In a way, that sort of thinking does, however, come into your assignments, because at least two of the modules, so modules 2 and 3, I would say, are going to involve you reflecting on teaching that you do. So you will be thinking about your practice, you will be evaluating it in some way and linking it to theory and analysing it and reflecting on what you've done. But that's really for the purposes of an assignment. So you're not having to do that in an ongoing way. You're not submitting evidence from your lessons that you've taught. It just comes into the assignments for particular purposes, for particular modules.
Okay, excellent. And it seems that we have managed to group all the questions and complete them this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending. Again, Dr. Rupert, was lovely having you with us. Thank you for the webinar, very informative. We are currently accepting applications for October. I know it's a little bit early, as Dr. Rupert has said. However, there are very limited seats available for the October cohort. So I really do encourage you to get in touch with us. Send us your documents as early as now so that we can start assessing them and sending them over to the university. Okay. Thank you again, Dr. Rupert, and a good evening to you and everyone else.
Thank you very much. It's been good talking to you, and hopefully get to see some of you on our courses in future. Good luck. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.